Hey everyone, I'm your author June. Before we get started, I really would appreciate it if everyone could hit the subscribe button. It helps me grow the channel, and I would love for all of you to come on this journey with me, as a family. Now, let's get into the story. Let me know if you enjoy. The stagecoach coughed Eliza onto Deadwood Crossing sun-baked street, a graceless dismount into a world of grit and gawkers. The air, thick with the acrid tang of burning wood and the coppery scent of unearthed ore, stung her nostrils. Men, clad in soiled canvas and adorned with the ever-present glint of steel, scrutinized her arrival, their stares impertinent and lingering. Eliza drew herself up, adjusted her spectacles, and dismissed them with a studied indifference. Intimidation would not sway her. This benighted place was precisely where truth needed to take root. A fracas of snapping jaws and whirling fur erupted near the livery stable, a brutal ballet of canine aggression. A chorus of cheers and backslaps followed, a jarring counterpoint to Eliza's resolve. This was no romanticized frontier idyll. This was something visceral. She directed her steps toward the Grand Saloon, the most imposing edifice in the rough-hewn streetscape, intent on securing lodging and perhaps gauging the town's power players. Inside, the saloon was a roaring crucible of sound, the delicate chime of crystal, the guffaws that threatened the rafters, and the relentless syncopation of a tinny piano. A miasma of pipe smoke and the sharp bite of rye hung heavy in the air. At a corner table, a card game unfolded, a tense tableau of concentration and avarice. One man, a behemoth of a fellow crowned with a prodigious mustache and eyes that gleamed with cunning, swept the pot toward himself. "Another one bites the dust, Sheriff Thompson," he roared, his tone dripping with condescension. Thompson, a lanky man with world-weary eyes, exhaled heavily and pushed away from the table. "Maybe," he conceded softly. "Maybe not tonight." Eliza watched him retreat, a disquieting feeling unfurling in her stomach. Something felt amiss. She approached the table, her gaze sweeping over the remaining participants. "Excuse me," she declared, her voice carrying with surprising clarity over the din. "Did I just witness that gentleman discreetly acquire an extra card?" A wave of attention crashed upon her. Barlow's jovial facade crumbled. "What'd you say, lady?" "A simple inquiry," Eliza countered, refusing to yield. "It merely appeared that your good fortune may have been facilitated by a touch of legerdemain." Silence descended, thick and heavy. Even the piano player's nimble fingers froze above the ivory keys. Barlow lumbered to his feet, a mountain of menace looming over Eliza. "You calling me a cheat, lady?" "I am offering an observation," she corrected, her tone unwavering. "One that suggests a certain elasticity in your adherence to the rules." A figure peeled away from the assembled onlookers. Deputy Jake Matthews, a man built of granite and grit, with a gaze that could bore through steel, moved with an understated authority that commanded respect. "All right, Barlow," he stated, his voice a low rumble. "Let's keep it civil." "This broad saying I cheated, Jake," Barlow snarled, his face reddening. Jake turned his gaze upon Eliza. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, assessed her with a dispassionate intensity. "Is this true, ma'am?" "Undeniably," Eliza affirmed, meeting his scrutinizing stare without hesitation. "I saw it plainly." Jake sighed, a sound barely audible. "Barlow, you know the drill. Fair play or no play." "She's a liar," Barlow protested vehemently. Jake's expression remained unyielding. "Empty your pockets, Barlow." After a pregnant pause filled with defiance, Barlow grudgingly complied. A telltale playing card, the Queen of Spades, fluttered onto the felt-covered surface. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Barlow's complexion deepened to a furious crimson. "All right, Barlow," Jake announced, his voice gaining a sharp edge. "You're suspended from the tables for a week." Barlow glared first at Eliza, then at Jake, a simmering fury in his eyes. "This ain't over," he spat, before storming out of the saloon. Jake directed his attention back to Eliza, his gaze still holding an intense scrutiny. "Name?" "Eliza Thornton," she responded. "Journalist." Jake's eyebrows arched slightly. "A journalist? What brings you to Deadwood Crossing?" "I intend to chronicle this town," Eliza declared, her eyes alight with conviction. "To unearth the truth." Jake's features grew somber. "The truth can be a dangerous commodity in a place like this, Miss Thornton." "Then its exposure is all the more critical," Eliza retorted, her voice infused with steel. Jake shook his head slowly. "You're going to kick up a hornet's nest." "Perhaps," Eliza conceded, a hint of defiance flickering in her gaze. "But sometimes a disturbance is precisely what's needed." He studied her for a moment longer, his expression indecipherable. "I'm Deputy Jake Matthews. Welcome to Deadwood Crossing." He pivoted on his heel and disappeared into the throng, leaving Eliza to contemplate the depths of the situation she had plunged into. The following morning, Eliza transformed her rented room at the Grand Saloon into a makeshift office. She unpacked her typewriter, a sleek obsidian engine of words that seemed utterly out of place amidst the rough-hewn furniture. She meticulously arranged her notes, sharpened her pencils to needle-like points, and commenced her task. Her inaugural piece was a seemingly innocuous examination of the inflated prices at the town's general store, an establishment conveniently owned by Sheriff Thompson. Subtly, she alluded to a potential quid pro quo between Thompson and the mine magnates, implying the exorbitant prices served to keep the miners perpetually indebted and shackled to their grueling labor. She concluded the article late in the afternoon, her fingers throbbing from the incessant hammering of keys. She carried it to the local print shop, a cramped, dusty domain presided over by a wizened old man named Silas. Silas perused the article, his brow furrowed in concern. "This is potent stuff, Miss Thornton. It is the unvarnished truth," Eliza affirmed. "Truth can be a costly venture," Silas cautioned, his voice raspy, "especially when it incites those in positions of power." "I am prepared to bear the expense," Eliza replied, her resolve unwavering. Silas shrugged, his shoulders lifting and falling with a weary sigh. "All right, I'll set it in type." The newspaper, the Deadwood Crossing Pioneer, appeared on the streets the next morning. Eliza observed from her window, as citizens absorbed its contents, their reactions ranging from stunned disbelief to outright indignation. The article ignited a firestorm. Miners voiced their grievances about the exorbitant costs, some even threatening a boycott of Thompson's mercantile. Later that day, Jake Matthews cornered Eliza at the saloon as she nursed a solitary cup of coffee. "That was a bold gambit, Miss Thornton," he remarked, his voice laced with concern. "It was imperative," Eliza countered, meeting his gaze head-on. "You've acquired some formidable adversaries," Jake warned. "Thompson won't take this lying down, nor will the mine owners." "I am not easily intimidated," Eliza asserted, though a fleeting flicker of unease betrayed her outward confidence. "You should be prudent," Jake advised, his voice softening slightly. "This town isn't as refined as you might assume. People have a habit of vanishing around here." "Are you issuing a threat, Deputy?" Eliza challenged, her chin lifting defiantly. I am issuing a caution, Jake clarified. There's a distinction. I am attempting to ensure your well-being. I require no protector, Eliza retorted, her voice firm. I am perfectly capable of safeguarding myself. Jake sighed, raking a wary hand through his hair. You possess a remarkable stubbornness, Miss Thornton. I'll grant you that. And you are hesitant to challenge the established order, Deputy, Eliza countered. Afraid to upset the status quo. Jake's jaw tightened perceptibly. I am obligated to uphold the law, he stated, his voice hardening. Not to engage in self-appointed justice. Sometimes the law falls short, Eliza asserted, her voice dropping to a low register. Sometimes justice necessitates something more, something beyond the letter of the law. Their eyes locked, a silent clash of wills. Eliza detected a flicker of doubt in Jake's gaze, a hint of the internal struggle that raged within him. He believed in the legal framework, yet he also possessed a deep-seated sense of right and wrong. And Eliza suspected that, at his core, he recognized the validity of her cause. Just exercise caution, Miss Thornton, Jake pleaded, his voice tinged with weariness. That is all I request. He turned and strode away, leaving Eliza alone with her thoughts and the weight of her convictions. She was acutely aware that she was engaged in a perilous game, but retreat was no longer an option. The truth deserved to be unearthed, regardless of the personal cost. She inhaled deeply and returned to her room, prepared to pen the next installment in her exposé of Deadwood Crossing. A palpable tension hung in the air, a heady brew of anticipation and trepidation. The wind stirred eddies of dust outside her window as the ink flowed from her pen, each stroke a defiant challenge to the powers that held sway, and a testament to Eliza's unwavering commitment to justice. Whispers of corruption, the sun hammered Deadwood Crossing, turning the dusty streets into sun-baked clay. Eliza, clutching her notepad, strolled along Main Street, engaging merchants and townsfolk in seemingly idle chatter. She angled for details about Mayor Harrison's dealings, each exchange a delicate probe seeking a chink in the armor of secrecy surrounding him. She felt the weight of their wary gazes, heard the tremor in their voices, a palpable dread hung like a shroud. He's certainly prospered, hasn't he? She'd comment, affecting innocent curiosity, gauging their responses. A lowered gaze, a mumbled agreement, a strained smile fragments in the mosaic she was constructing. Most clammed up entirely, their eyes flicking nervously towards the looming presence of the mayor's office. Yet, a few, emboldened by liquid courage or the cloak of anonymity, offered furtive revelations, tales of land grabs, manipulated contracts, and shady deals. Accounts emerged of miners swindled out of their due, businesses bled dry by usurious taxes. These whispers crafted a portrait of a man who viewed Deadwood Crossing not as a community, but as his personal domain. Across the street, Jake Matthews watched from the shade of the general store's awning. He justified it as keeping the peace, but the truth was, he was watching Eliza. He noted the resolve etched on her face, the unwavering fire in her eyes. He admired her audacity, even as it filled him with trepidation. She was stirring a viper's nest, and Harrison was not a man to cross. He also perceived a certain raw vulnerability, a flicker of pain she masked with defiance. An unexpected protectiveness stirred within him, an urge to shelter her from the impending storm. He saw Mrs. Gable, the baker's spouse, hurry past Eliza, tugging her son along. He knew her to be usually jovial, but her face was drawn and tight. Eliza stopped her, a question forming on her lips. Mrs. Gable simply shook her head, murmuring something indistinct before rushing on. Jake's gut twisted with unease. Something was decidedly amiss. Later, in the dim light of the saloon, Eliza sat with a weak whiskey, sifting through her notes, attempting to connect the scattered pieces. The smoky atmosphere vibrated with hushed conversations. She felt the prickling awareness of eyes on her, evaluating her every move. This sensation only hardened her determination. Jake's arrival at the saloon was immediately noted. His gaze swept the room, settling on Eliza. He approached her with a measured stride. Without a word, he pulled up a chair, his eyes fixed on hers. "You're playing with fire," he warned, his voice a low rumble. Eliza met his stare, unyielding. "That's the intention, Deputy. Harrison doesn't fight fair. He has influence. People get hurt. Are you making threats, Deputy?" Jake sighed, raking his fingers through his hair. "I'm giving you a warning. For your own sake." He paused, his expression softening. "I don't want to see you get caught in the crossfire." Eliza scrutinized him, searching for any sign of deceit. She found only genuine concern. "Why?" she breathed, barely audible. Jake averted his gaze, his jaw clenched. "It's my duty to protect the citizenry." "Is it?" Eliza challenged, her voice tinged with skepticism. "Or is it your duty to protect Harrison and his cronies?" Anger flared in Jake's eyes. "That's uncalled for." "Is it?" Eliza shot back. "You're a lawman in a town controlled by a corrupt mayor. Which side are you on, Deputy? The law, or what's right?" Jake stood abruptly, the chair screeching on the floorboards. "I've got to go," he said, his voice tight. He turned and vanished into the throng. Eliza watched him leave, a knot of anxiety twisting in her stomach. She couldn't decipher him. He seemed genuinely torn, caught between obligation and his principles. But she couldn't afford to trust him, not yet. Back in her boarding house room, a single lamp cast elongated shadows that danced on the walls. She resumed her ball. Examination of the notes, seeking a pattern, a link, anything to expose Harrison's treachery. A floorboard groaned outside her door. She stilled, her heart hammering. Her hand instinctively went to the small derringer beneath her pillow. A slip of paper slid beneath the perker. "Door." Cautiously, Eliza retrieved it, her hand trembling slightly. She unfolded the paper and read the words scrawled in crude letters. "Leave Deadwood. Before it's too late." A shiver traced its way down her spine. This transcended a mere warning. It was an explicit threat, an overture of violence. Fear threatened to consume her, but she suppressed it, forcing herself to maintain composure. She would not be cowed. She would not be silenced. She would expose the truth, regardless of the cost. Crushing the note in her fist, her knuckles bone white, the lamp flickered, creating spectral illusions on the wall. Eliza peered out the window, into the inky blackness. The town slumbered, yet she knew she was not alone. She was under surveillance, a target, but she refused to yield. She would stand her ground and fight for justice, even if it demanded everything. A metallic tang filled her mouth. She steeled herself. This confrontation would be a brutal one. Barroom brawl, the Golden Nugget Saloon throbbed with a simmering menace. Sawdust whispered under Eliza's boots as she navigated towards the bar. The air a cloying blend of stale beer, body odor, and suppressed animosity. She requested a whiskey, straight, and leaned against the scarred wood for support. The stares weren't casual. They assessed, calculated, measured her worth or lack thereof. A palpable dread seeped into the atmosphere. heavy as lingering chimney smoke. Two figures peeled away from a poker game in the corner. Brutus and Clyde. Jake had identified them. Harrison's enforcers. They ambled towards her, their expressions granite, their eyes vacant. Brutus halted, spitting a brown stream into a nearby receptacle. "Well now," he rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. "Look what the wind blew in. Still poking around, little lady?" Eliza met his gaze, her stomach a knot of tension. "Just having a drink." Clyde snickered, a dry, grating sound. "A drink? Or stirring up trouble?" The mayor frowns on that sort of thing. He closed the distance, invading her space. The reek of cheap liquor and unwashed bodies assaulted her nostrils. "I'm not causing trouble," Eliza replied, her voice level despite her trembling hands. "I'm merely asking questions." Brutus lowered his head, his fetid breath warming her face. "Maybe you should direct your inquiries elsewhere. Somewhere far, far away." He reached out, his thick fingers clamping around her wrist. A voice sliced through the tension, sharp and brittle. "Take your hands off her, Brutus." "Jake." He stood nearby, his face a steady and controlled rage. The saloon fell silent. Every eye fixed on the unfolding drama. Brutus tightened his grip on Eliza's wrist. He grinned at Jake, a predatory flash in his eyes. "Well, if it isn't our resident do-gooder. Gonna cite us for being sociable?" "You're harassing a patron," Jake stated, his voice a low warning. "And you know it." "Harassing?" Brutus played the innocent. "Just a friendly chat. Isn't that right, darlin'?" He squeezed her wrist, a silent threat. Eliza bit back a curse. "Let go of me." Brutus disregarded her. He returned his attention to Jake, malice gleaming in his eyes. "Maybe the deputy needs a little reminder of who calls the shots around here." He shoved Eliza towards Jake, weaponizing her. Jake caught her, his hand firm on her arm. His eyes scanned her, concern etched in their depths. "Get out of here, Eliza, now." She shook her head, a spark of defiance igniting in her eyes. "I'm not leaving." All hell broke loose. Brutus launched a wild swing at Jake's head. Jake ducked, the blow whistling past his ear. He countered with a sharp jab to Brutus's jaw, sending the larger man staggering. Clyde charged, bellowing like a wounded beast. Jake sidestepped him, sweeping his leg in a swift maneuver. Clyde crashed headfirst into a table, scattering glasses and playing cards. The saloon erupted in pandemonium. Fists flew, chairs shattered, and curses filled the air. Jake moved with an agility and precision Eliza hadn't suspected. He wasn't just a lawman, he was a combatant, each movement precise and deadly. He evaded, deflected, and struck with calculated force, incapacitating his adversaries without inflicting permanent damage. It was a brutal ballet, a testament to years of training and hard-won experience. Eliza found herself pinned against the bar, a captive audience to the violent spectacle. She saw Jake absorb a blow to the face, a blossoming crimson stain marking his skin. He didn't falter, didn't even miss a beat. He continued the fight, his determination unwavering. The fracas lasted mere minutes, yet stretched into an eternity. When the dust settled, Brutus and Clyde lay moaning amidst the wreckage. Jake stood over them, his chest rising and falling heavily, his knuckles raw and bleeding. The silence in the aftermath was absolute. He pivoted towards Eliza, his gaze a turbulent sea of emotions. Relief, anger, and something else she couldn't quite identify. "I told you to leave," he growled, his voice roughened. "I wasn't about to abandon you to them," she retorted, her own voice trembling slightly. "You're reckless," he said, his jaw tight with suppressed emotion. "You needlessly endangered yourself." "I'm trying to uncover the truth," she snapped back, Something you seem loath to do." He recoiled, as if physically struck. "That's not fair, Eliza." "Isn't it?" she challenged. "You're a deputy. You're sworn to uphold the law. Yet you're allowing Harrison to operate with impunity." "I'm doing what I can," he replied, his voice strained and defensive. "But I have to operate within the confines of the system. I can't simply arrest individuals without evidence." "The evidence is staring you in the face, Jake," she insisted, her voice softer now. "You simply have to acknowledge it." He sighed, raking a hand through his disheveled hair. "It's not that simple, Eliza. I have a responsibility to this town, to the people who rely on me." "And what about your responsibility to justice?" she pressed, her voice barely audible. He averted his eyes, pain flickering within them. "Sometimes justice and the law diverge." "Then which do you choose?" she pleaded, her voice laced with desperation. He remained silent, unable to answer, the burden of his badge, the weight of his loyalty. The crushing pressure of his internal conflict overwhelmed him. He turned and strode away, leaving Eliza standing amidst the saloon's ruins, the taste of disillusionment bitter on her tongue. The golden nugget felt colder than before. She hugged herself tightly, a deep ache settling within her. Scars and stories, the golden nugget, desolate and still echoing, felt like a mausoleum. Fine sawdust motes danced in the disturbed air, catching the pallid light that squeezed through the soiled windows. Jake, after swiping dust from a chair, gestured for Eliza to sit. She remained rooted, jaw clenched. His intervention in the brawl, his shield against the violence, hadn't altered the core problem. "They'll be back," she predicted, her tone even and devoid of inflection. "Harrison nurses a grudge." Jake's sigh ruffled his already untamed hair. "Precisely why you need to extract yourself, Eliza. Head back east. Find another story. Something less risky?" Her laugh was a brittle sound, hollow of amusement. "You think my concern is personal safety, Deputy?" She pivoted, pacing the confined space. He observed her, the rigid line of her back telegraphing her inner turmoil. He recognized that stance, the tightly wound posture of someone bracing against the next blow. "Then, enlighten me," he prompted, his voice gentler. He knew he was treading carefully, but he had to understand the engine driving her. She halted, her back still to him. A heavy silence blanketed the room. At last, she broke the quiet, her voice a fragile thread. "My father, he ran a small print shop in Philadelphia. He published pamphlets, essays, things the city's elite preferred unpublished." Slowly, she turned, her eyes, typically blazing with defiance, now shadowed by an ancient pain. There was a controversy regarding zoning, a proposed railway expansion, land grabs orchestrated from City Hall. "My father wrote about it." He peeled back the layers of graft, the whispered deals. A cold dread coiled in Jake's gut. He anticipated the inevitable dissent. "They retaliated," Eliza continued, her voice strengthening, fueled by long-simmering outrage. "Fines, lawsuits, fabricated charges. They financially strangled him. Then, one night his press was incinerated. Everything, reduced to cinders." She impaled Jake with her gaze. "He was gone within months, not from the burns, but from the sheer, crushing defeat. The sense of injustice, utter helplessness." Her voice fractured. She averted her gaze, battling for composure. Jake rose, moving toward her, but hesitated to make contact. He felt the raw grief radiating from her, the banked anger, and understood her need to unburden herself. "And your mother?" he inquired softly. Eliza swallowed thickly. She never rallied. Her spirit withered. She simply gave up. Passed before the year was out. I was 17, barely. Unspoken grief hung heavy in the air. Jake closed the distance, finally resting a hand on her arm. She didn't recoil, but her muscles felt like piano wire stretched taut. "I get it," he offered, though he knew he couldn't truly fathom the depths of her experience. He carried his own ghosts, but hers were stained with the venom of betrayal and corruption. She shrugged off his touch, her eyes flashing with renewed fire. "Do you? Do you comprehend the feeling of watching everything you value systematically dismantled by men who pervert the law?" He lowered his hand, stung, yet comprehending the source of her barbs. "No," he conceded. "Not precisely, but I understand what it's like to lose everything." He paused, the words snagging in his throat. He hadn't spoken of it in years, preferring to bury the memories deep, under lock and key. But gazing at Eliza, witnessing the agony etched on her features, he felt an urge to confide, to offer her a piece of himself. "My family," he began, his voice raspy. "They farmed land just outside Dodge City. We knew happiness." The word felt foreign on his tongue, almost absurd. He drew a ragged breath, forcing himself to continue. "One night, bandits descended, searching for cash, supplies. My father, he stood against them. My mother, she tried to shield my little sister." He squeezed his eyes shut, the images flaring behind his eyelids. The screams, the gunfire, the crimson stainy. He forced the nightmare back, focusing on Eliza, on the imperative to connect. "They slaughtered them all," he uttered, his voice a mere whisper. "Every last one. I was out hunting. I returned to emptiness." He opened his eyes, meeting Eliza's unwavering stare. He saw the shock mirrored there, the dawning understanding, the realization that he was more than a badge and a uniform, but a man irrevocably scarred by his own tragedy. "That's why I pin on this star every day," he continued, the words spilling out, the dam finally breached. "Not for authority, not for accolades, but to ensure that no one else endures that hell, that no one else tastes that void." He dropped his gaze, ashamed of the raw emotion he had laid bare. He rarely exhumed these memories, preferring to keep the pain interred, a constant silent reminder of his failure. Eliza stepped closer, her hand reaching out hesitantly to brush his arm. This time, he didn't flinch. "I'm sorry, Jake," she murmured, her voice soft, laced with genuine regret. "I had no idea." He met her eyes. He saw empathy reflected there, a mutual acknowledgement of suffering and devastation. He saw something else as well, a faint flicker of hope. "It's in the past," he said, his voice hoarse. "It's ancient history, but it resonated now. It resonated that she knew. It resonated that he had finally shared the weight he had borne for so long." "It matters," Eliza countered. "It casts light on everything." She glanced around the saloon, at the overturned tables, the splintered glass, the lingering metallic tang of gunpowder. "But it doesn't alter the present. Harrison is still venal. He's still preying on people. And someone has to stop him." Jake knew the truth of her words, but he also understood the peril she courted. He couldn't allow her to become another casualty. "There has to be another recourse," he insisted, his voice pleading. "One that doesn't end with you buried 6 feet under." Eliza shook her head, resolve hardening her features. "There is no other. Not if I intend to effect real change." She advanced, her gaze unflinching. "You said you wear that badge to safeguard the vulnerable, to shield them from harm. Well, Harrison is systematically bleeding this town dry, Jake. He's pilfering their land, their livelihoods, their very futures. Are you going to stand idly by and watch him do it?" He met her gaze, the inferno within her eyes, the unwavering purpose in her bearing. He knew he couldn't stand apart and watch her confront this leviathan alone. "What do you require of me?" he asked, his tone resigned. A delicate smile played on Eliza's lips. "Help me unearth the facts, the concrete proof to expose him. The kind of evidence that even Harrison can't bury beneath his wealth and influence." Jake knew he was teetering on the precipice, a line he had sworn to uphold his entire career, but looking at Eliza, witnessing the embers of hope kindled in her eyes, he knew he had no recourse. He would gamble his badge, his career, even his existence, to stand by her. "Agreed," he responded, his voice firm. "I'll be your ally, but you must promise me something in return. Promise me you will exercise vigilance in every aspect of your involvement." Eliza nodded, her eyes searching his depths. "I pledge that I will act prudently," she said softly. "But you must offer your solemn word as well. Promise that you'll be ready to bend the rules, even break them, if that's what it takes to bring him to his knees." Jake hesitated. He had always clung to the sanctity of the law, in upholding justice through legitimate avenues. But he realized, deep within, that sometimes the legal framework proved insufficient. On rare occasions, you needed to stretch it, even shatter it, to attain genuine justice. He regarded Eliza, at the physical and emotional wound she carried. He envisioned his own scars, the pain he had striven so diligently to conceal. He knew the path he must tread. "I promise," he affirmed, his voice low and unyielding. In the ensuing silence, an unspoken alliance solidified between them, a bond forged in mutual trauma, in a shared yearning for retribution, and in a burgeoning, undeniable attraction. They were both fractured, both scarred, but united, they might just possess the strength to topple the most formidable figure in Deadwood Crossing. Stolen truths, the air in Eliza's office was stagnant, a damp shroud as she turned the key. A wave of stale paper and displaced dust assaulted her senses. She gasped. More than disarray, this was desecration. Drawers gaped open, their contents strewn about like casualties of some unseen battle. Shredded files lay underfoot, brittle remnants of her work. Her beloved typewriter, usually a steadfast companion, was toppled, its keys gleaming faintly in the dim light leaking through the soiled window. Bile rose in her throat, a chilling premonition settling deep. This wasn't merely about pilfered information. It was an assault on her very essence. She stood paralyzed, her pulse a frantic drum against her ribs. The room felt claustrophobic, the shadows deepening, the silence amplifying the threat. A stark reminder of Harrison's reach, a tangible expression of the peril she courted. The fire of her conviction wavered, threatened by a gust of doubt. "Eliza? What's happened?" Jake's voice, laced with concern, cut through the oppressive quiet. He stood behind her, a reassuring presence amidst the chaos. She spun around, her voice a mere thread. "They were here. Everything. They took it." Jake's eyes, normally warm with amusement, narrowed with focused intensity as he took in the devastation. He moved with deliberate care, his gaze cataloging every detail, his hands scrupulously avoiding contact. Kneeling beside the overturned machine, his jaw tightened. "Anything else gone besides the files?" he murmured. Eliza could only shake her head, her voice caught in her throat. The loss of her research felt like a violation of her core being, an attack on her purpose. She collapsed into the least damaged chair, its springs offering a noisy protest. The room felt defiled, tainted beyond repair. Jake straightened, his gaze locking with hers. "Stay put. Don't touch anything. I'll get back up. We'll check for prints." His expression was a mask of grim resolve. Each second stretched into an eternity as Eliza remained captive amidst the wreckage of her endeavors. Only the frantic rhythm of her own heart broke the silence. Doubt clawed at her. Was she truly capable of this fight? Was she a mere fool, chasing shadows, endangering herself and those she cared for a cause already doomed? The burden of her father's past failures weighed heavily upon her, suffocating her spirit. Jake returned, flanked by two grim-faced deputies. They moved with practiced expertise, meticulously gathering evidence, their silence exacerbating the sense of intrusion. Approaching Eliza, Jake's gaze held a blend of worry and determination. "We found something," he murmured, his voice low and serious. "A button. Expensive material. Looks like it came off a tailored suit." He held out a small, dark button, its surface reflecting the weak light. Eliza recognized it instantly. She had seen Harrison wearing that very suit, dark, impeccably tailored, a symbol of his power and wealth. "It's Harrison," she breathed, her voice trembling. "It has to be." Jake nodded grimly. "It's not definitive proof, but it's something to work with." He paused, his gaze softening with concern. "Eliza, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." She shook her head, struggling to suppress her tears. "I don't know. Jake, I feel so exposed, utterly vulnerable. They took more than just documents. They took." Her voice trailed off, unable to fully articulate the sense of having been laid bare. Jake knelt beside her, his hand covering hers. His touch was warm, a firm anchor in the swirling torrent. "They didn't steal your carriage, Eliza. That remains untouched. And the truth they seek to bury, they may have delayed its reveal, but they cannot erase it." His words, spoken with such unwavering conviction, resonated within her. Gazing into his eyes, she saw the steadfast support, and a spark of hope ignited within her. "I'm just as scared, Jake," she confessed, the words raw and honest. "I'm terrified that I lack the strength for this, that I'm destined to fail, just as my father did." Jake squeezed her hand. "You are not your father, Eliza. You possess an inner resilience you haven't even begun to recognize. And you are far from alone in this. I'm here, and we'll see this through together. We will expose Harrison, no matter the cost." His expression hardened. "He overstepped when he targeted you. Now, it's a personal matter." He rose, his jaw firm, his eyes blazing with a fierce resolve. The very air in the room seemed to shift, the shadows receding slightly. Eliza felt a surge of renewed determination, fueled by Jake's unwavering belief and her own burning desire for justice. The path ahead would be perilous, fraught with danger, but she was no longer isolated. She had an ally, a protector, someone who believed in her, even when she doubted herself. And that, she realized, was a weapon far more potent than any document, any secret. "What's our next move?" she asked, her voice stronger, more determined. Jake turned towards her, a hint of the smile gracing his lips. "Now," he said, "we strike back." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the devastated office. "But first, we extract you from this mess. I refuse to let you spend another moment in this place tonight. You're coming home with me." The saloon wall, rough as a hangman's rope, offered Jake scant comfort. His senses swam in a miasma of stale hops and ground and dirt. Yet his attention burrowed into a far corner where a card game unfolded. He sifted the murmurs surrounding Harrison's crew. Fear, perhaps avarice, glued their lips shut, but even the tightest mouths leaked secrets. Whispers of shady acquisitions, railway magnates, and furtive exchanges of currency. He swallowed a mouthful of tepid beer, the acrid tang echoing the apprehension twisting within him. This reeked of something beyond mere graft, a meticulously woven tapestry of deception threatening to choke Deadwood Crossing's very life. His initial probes had been subtle inquiries about real estate values, recent transactions, the buzz around the impending railroad. Every question danced along a razor's edge, juggling his badge with his growing compulsion to aid Eliza in unveiling the truth. Premature suspicion was a luxury he couldn't afford. The deeper he probed, however, the more apparent it became that Harrison was a mere puppet. This was about dominion, absolute power, and reshaping the territorial map to suit a dark agenda. The name Corbin surfaced like a festering wound. A railroad baron infamous for his pitiless efficiency and callous disregard for obstacles. Deadwood Crossing, or rather its geography, was Corbin's prison linchpin in the Iron Horse's westward charge. Harrison, it seemed, was Corbin's instrument, smoothing the path and crushing dissent. The image of Eliza confronting such a force sent a jolt of icy dread through Jake. Courageous, undoubtedly, yet also exposed, a solitary voice against an onrushing tempest. He found himself perpetually watchful, his hand instinctively hovering near his pistol, a silent vow to shield her, even at the cost of the principles he'd sworn sacred. Later, beneath a sky bruised with impending night, Jake occupied the porch of his humble dwelling. Crickets chirped, their song the only counterpoint to the wind sighing through the prairie grasses, carrying the promise of rain. His thoughts drifted to his father, a man who lived and died by the letter of the law, a man who'd instilled in him an unwavering sense of duty. But what was fealty to the law worth when the law itself was bent and broken? Would he best honor his father's memory through blind obedience, or by fighting for genuine justice, even if it demanded transgression? Closing his eyes, he felt the crushing burden of his dilemma. Eliza's spirit resonated within him, her resolute gaze, her burning faith in truth. He could not stand idly by as Harrison and Corbin extinguished her flame. Action was imperative, no matter the personal cost. The rumble of an approaching wagon shattered his reverie. He rose, his hand automatically seeking the reassuring weight of his gun. As the vehicle neared, he recognized the driver, a cadaverous man whose piercing gaze was shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. Silas, proprietor of the print shop in the neighboring town, a man of discretion, known for speaking uncomfortable truths. Yet something about his arrival felt discordant, hinting at hidden depths. Silas brought the wagon to a creaking halt, the horses stamping and blowing. He dismounted with slow, deliberate movements. "Deputy Matthews," he greeted, his voice a dry rustle. "I heard Miss Thornton might require a printer." Jake scrutinized him, eyes narrowed. "What brings you to Deadwood Crossing, Silas?" he questioned, his tone low and wary. Silas met his gaze unflinchingly. "Let's merely suggest I have a vested interest in seeing justice prevail," he countered, a thread of steel in his timbre. "And Miss Thornton strikes me as the sole individual willing to champion it." He paused, a fleeting darkness crossing his features. Moreover, I understand the air in Deadwood Crossing is stimulating. A sense of unease prickled at Jake. Silas's unannounced entrance, the veiled menace in his words, the knowing glint in his eyes, it all felt wrong. Another piece of the puzzle, perhaps, but one that refused to fit neatly. A new player had entered the game, and Jake remained uncertain of his allegiance. He observed Silas unloading his printing press, the heavy equipment clanging in the nocturnal stillness. The arrival of Silas hung like a gathering storm, threatening to unleash havoc and upheaval. The following morning, Eliza discovered Jake awaiting her outside the newspaper office. He appeared fatigued, his eyes ringed with worry. "Harrison's connected to Corbin," he disclosed, his voice hushed. "The railroad tycoon. They covet Deadwood Crossing, Eliza, and they'll resort to any means to seize it." Eliza gasped. Corbin. She had heard tales of him, whispers of his mercilessness and staggering wealth. The stakes had abruptly escalated. "We require evidence, Jake. Irrefutable proof." Jake nodded grimly. "I'm pursuing it. But exercise caution, Eliza. This spans far beyond what we initially believed. And Silas is present." Eliza frowned. "Silas? The printer? What are his intentions?" "He claims he wishes to assist," Jake replied, his voice colored with skepticism. "But I distrust him. There's something amiss about him." A shiver traced Eliza's spine. She relied on Jake's instincts. He possessed a knack for discerning character, for sensing peril before it manifested. "We'll proceed with care," she affirmed, her tone resolute. "But we cannot retreat now, not when we're so near the truth." Across the street, Silas observed them, his expression inscrutable. The phantoms of the past clung to him like a shroud, a ceaseless memento of choices made and prices exacted. He had journeyed to Deadwood Crossing seeking atonement, an opportunity to rectify his transgressions. Yet he knew the path to redemption was fraught with hazard, and might demand his ultimate sacrifice. He had a decision to make. In either case, blood would stain the soil. Hidden attraction, a nervous tickle danced across the nape of Jake's neck. He'd been observing Eliza's office, ostensibly to safeguard her, but his true quarry was Silas. Sure enough, a figure materialized from the gloom of the alley across from the Deadwood Crossing Gazette. Though a wide-brimmed hat concealed his features, the rigid set of his shoulders telegraphed Silas's identity. A primal unease seized Jake as he registered Silas's gaze fixed on Eliza's window-awe predator poised to strike. He muttered a curse. Things were spiraling out of control. He crossed the thoroughfare, the hollow sound of his boots against the boardwalk echoing in the stillness. He had to warn Eliza, pull her from harm's way before Silas took drastic measures. A sharp rap of his knuckles reverberated on her door, and Eliza's questioning gaze met his. "Jake, what is it? You look haunted." "No time," he breathed, urgency lacing his tone. "Silas, he's watching you. We need to move, now." Comprehension dawned in her eyes, her hand flying to her mouth. "Silas? But why would he?" "I don't know," Jake interrupted, taking her arm in a firm yet gentle grip. "But it's bad news. There's an old root cellar behind the mercantile, forgotten by time. It's our best bet for a temporary sanctuary." He guided her out of the office, his senses on high alert as they melted into the deepening shadows. The waning sun painted the buildings with grotesque silhouettes that shifted and swayed, obscuring their path. They hurried along the edges of buildings until the general store came into view. Jake steered her toward the back, where a decaying wooden portal, nearly swallowed by weeds, marked the cellar's entrance. He wrestled it open, exposing a chasm of darkness and mustiness. "After you," he urged. Eliza hesitated, then slipped inside. Jake followed, drawing the door shut, plunging them into absolute opacity. The air was thick, heavy, cool, and laden with the scent of damp earth and decay. "How atmospheric," Eliza quipped, a nervous edge to her humor. Jake gave a soft chuckle. "Not exactly a 5-star hotel, but it'll do. Stay put. I'll try to gauge what Silas is planning." He turned to leave, but Eliza's hand caught his arm. "Wait, Jake, thank you for watching over me." He turned back, his gaze locking with hers in the dimness. He saw fear lurking in her eyes, but something deeper resonated there, quickening his pulse. "I couldn't bear it if something happened to you, Eliza. You're stirring up trouble, but it's the righteous kind." "Jake," she began, her voice barely audible. She edged closer, her fingers lingering on his arm. A palpable energy crackled between them. Silence stretched, punctuated only by their ragged breathing. He knew this was a dangerous precipice. He was a deputy, sworn to the letter of the law. Entangling himself with Eliza would only compound the risks, expose them both to greater peril. Yet, the pull she exerted was undeniable, a deep ache that flared whenever she was near. He had witnessed her bravery, her steadfast resolve to unearth the truth, and it had resurrected a dormant ember within him, one he thought long extinguished. "Eliza," he murmured, his voice thick with repressed emotion. He framed her face with his hands, his thumbs tracing the delicate curve of her cheekbones. Her skin was velvet soft. He felt the tremor in her hands, mirroring the tremors within him. "Jake," she whispered, her eyes searching his soul. He saw his own longing reflected in their depths. He lowered his head, his lips a hair's breadth from hers. He felt the warmth of her breath against his skin. "I shouldn't," he rasped, the words a tortured denial. "I know," she breathed in return, her gaze unwavering. "But I don't care." And with that, resistance crumbled. He closed the small gap between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that burned with desperation and tenderness. A kiss born of shared peril and unacknowledged desires. It tasted of grit and urgency, of something visceral and utterly captivating. Eliza responded with equal fervor, her arms encircling his neck, urging him closer. He deepened the kiss, his tongue tracing the outline of her lips. She parted them, and he groaned, yielding to the intoxicating sweetness of her. The world contracted, and only they existed, consumed by the heat of the moment. They remained entwined, until breathless and trembling, they finally broke apart. They stood for a beat, foreheads touching, eyes locked. "Jaker," Eliza's voice trembled. I didn't foresee that." "Neither did I," he confessed, his heart hammering. He retreated a step, struggling to regain his composure. He raked a hand through his hair, his gaze fixed on the earthen floor. "I'm sorry, Eliza. It shouldn't have happened." Eliza reached for his hand, her fingers weaving through his. "Don't apologize, Jake. It was good." He looked up, his eyes searching hers. "Good? Is that all?" Eliza smiled softly. "No," she confessed. "It was more than good. It was unexpected, and maybe a little dangerous." "Dangerous is practically my alias," Jake said, a wry curve to his lips. "I know," Eliza said, squeezing his hand. "That's precisely what I like about you." The moment solidified, heavy with unspoken words. Jake knew he had to leave, had to clear his head, chart a new course. He couldn't allow his affections for Eliza to cloud his judgment, not with so much at stake. "I should go," he said, disengaging his hand from hers. "I need to find out what Silas is planning." Eliza nodded, her face etched with concern. "Be careful, Jake. Always," he replied, turning to leave. He paused at the threshold, glancing back. "Eliza," he said, his voice low and heartfelt. "Whatever happens, you need to know that I care about you. More than I probably should." And then he was gone, leaving Eliza alone in the root cellar's darkness, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She sank to the ground, leaning against the cool earth. She closed her eyes, replaying the kiss in her mind. Reckless, impulsive, utterly unexpected, and yet exquisite. She had felt a connection with Jake that had eluded her for an eternity, but their burgeoning feelings could only complicate matters, placing them both in greater jeopardy. She was here to expose the truth, to bring Mayor Harrison to justice. She couldn't afford to become entangled with a lawman, regardless of how tempting. Duty called, and she wouldn't permit anything, or anyone, to deter her. Still, a warmth bloomed within her at the memory of Jake, his strong arms, his searing kiss. The buried attraction was now unearthed, and a perilous game had begun. Confrontation. The aroma of aged tobacco saturated Harrison's office, a cloying perfume clinging to the velvet draperies and gleaming surfaces of imported wood. The room, usually a symbol of power, felt constricting, the lavish decor now a suffocating testament to corruption. Behind the expanse of his desk, Harrison toyed with a gold pen, sunlight catching its nib with deceptive innocence. His expression was carefully neutral, yet a tremor of apprehension, a glint of calculation, betrayed him. "Jake," he rumbled, his tone an oily balm. "What brings you here?" Jake deposited the documents, photocopies of property records, incriminating bank transactions, Silas's meticulously encrypted accounts onto the polished surface. The sound was a muted declaration. "I believe you're aware, Mayor." Harrison reclined, forming a steeple with his fingers, pointedly ignoring the evidence. "My time is valuable, Deputy. I dislike games." "These aren't games, sir. They're indictments. Indictments for siphoning public funds, rigging real estate deals, and utilizing Silas Meacham as your blunt Kwachan instrument." Though Jake's voice remained level, a knot of foreboding tightened in his stomach. He understood the gravity of his actions, the perilous path he'd chosen. Harrison's amiable facade crumbled. "Are you making accusations, Deputy?" The honeyed voice now held a steely edge. "Yes, sir. I accuse you of violating the trust of Deadwood Crossing, of betraying its citizens." Harrison surged to his feet, his stature suddenly magnified. He circled the desk, invading Jake's personal space. The atmosphere thickened, charged with menace. "You're a decent man, Jake, a reliable one. I valued that. But loyalty can be misplaced. My allegiance is to justice, sir, to the people of this town." The words felt weighty, a fragile shield against the storm. "Brewing." A mirthless chuckle escaped Harrison's lips. "Justice? In Deadwood Crossing, justice bends to my will. I built this town. I command it. And I safeguard it from threats like you." These papers paint a different picture. Jake indicated the damning evidence. "They reveal a systematic pattern of graft, of power abused. They illustrate how you've been draining this town dry." Harrison's gaze sharpened. "Where did you acquire these?" Jake remained silent, unwilling to implicate Eliza directly, at least not yet. Harrison advanced, his face close enough to feel Jake's breath. That scribbler, Eliza Thornton. She instigated this, didn't she? Poisoned your mind. Eliza is irrelevant, Jake countered, the lie leaving a bitter taste. He saw the knowing in Harrison's eyes, the recognition that Eliza was the fuse. She's a rabble-rouser, Jake, an interloper. She misunderstands the way things operate here, and she's courting danger potentially worse. Harrison's voice was a low growl. Jake's fists clenched instinctively. Don't threaten her. The words were a reflex, born of a protectiveness that surprised him. Harrison's lips curled into a smirk. Is that the crux of it, Jake? Has the little spitfire bewitched you, allowing a woman to compromise your judgment? Jake disregarded the barb, needing to maintain focus. I'm here to arrest you, Mayor, for corruption, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Harrison threw his head back in booming laughter. Arrest me? You imagine you can arrest me? You're merely a deputy, Jake. I control this town. The sheriff is in my pocket. The judges dance to my tune. Who will support you? Jake hesitated, the truth a bitter pill. The entire system was compromised, rotten from the core. He stood alone. Harrison detected the flicker of doubt in Jake's eyes. Don't be a fool, Jake. You're out of your depth. Walk away. Forget you ever saw these documents. I'll compensate you handsomely. A promotion, a bonus, anything your heart desires. Jake regarded Harrison, the man he once admired, the man he believed embodied civic virtue. Now, he saw only a hollow facade, a venal tyrant clinging to power. I can't, sir. The words were soft, but resolute. Harrison's features hardened. Then you're a marked man, Jake. You and that little journalist. He spat the epithet like venom. Jake's hand instinctively moved towards his sidearm. He knew this was the decisive moment. He could retreat, deny what he'd witnessed, safeguard himself, his position, and perhaps even Eliza by distancing himself. But he was incapable. He couldn't betray his own principles. He couldn't allow Harrison to escape justice. He couldn't abandon Eliza to confront this predator alone. I'm giving you one last chance, Mayor, Jake stated, his voice low and dangerous. Surrender peacefully. We can do this the easy way, or the hard way. Harrison met his gaze, his eyes pools of frigid, calculating fury. You've made your choice, Jake. He reached into his desk drawer. Jake drew his revolver, the metallic snick shattering the suffocating silence. The die was cast. The Rubicon had been crossed. There was no turning back. He had embraced justice, embraced Eliza, even if it meant forfeiting everything. The law he had sworn to defend had become a tool of the corrupt, and he was choosing something greater, a conviction in what was righteous, and the nascent affection that had blossomed in his heart, a love worth fighting for, even at the point, ultimate cost. Railroad ties. Eliza hunched over the printing press, the metallic scent of ink thick in the air, a familiar comfort amidst the rising storm. Hours blurred into a restless vigil as she pieced together the damning evidence, each line of text a carefully placed brick in the wall she was building against Harrison. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. The truth demanded to be told, and the faces of the exploited, the cheated, the silenced, fueled her relentless pursuit. The rhythmic clang of the press was a relentless pulse, a counterpoint to the frantic beat of her own heart. She paused, wiping a smudge of ink from her cheek, the ghost of a smile playing on her lips. This article was different. This one wasn't just about Harrison's petty thievery or backroom deals. This one connected him, irrevocably, to the railroad. Jake's face flickered in her mind, a brief, unsettling image. The memory of him, gun drawn, facing down Harrison, sent a shiver down her spine, a chilling premonition of the danger that now encircled them both. She pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. This wasn't just about them. It was about Deadwood Crossing, about the promise of a fair future, a future free from the suffocating grip of corruption. She returned to her work, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose, the weight of responsibility settling heavy on her shoulders. The first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of pale gold and bruised purple, as Eliza finally pulled the last sheet from the press. The ink was still wet, the smell sharp and acrid, but the words were there, stark and undeniable, a challenge thrown down at the feet of power. She read through it one last time, her own voice echoing in her mind, each sentence a hammer blow against the carefully constructed facade of Mayor Harrison. Mayor Harrison, railroad baron's puppet? The headline screamed in bold, unforgiving letters. The article detailed the clandestine meetings, the hidden land grabs, the suspiciously timed accidents that had paved the way for the railroad's relentless expansion. It named names, cited dates, and presented evidence so irrefutable that even Harrison's staunchest supporters would struggle to ignore it. Eliza felt a grim satisfaction, a cold, hard knot of determination tightening in her stomach. This was it, the moment of truth. She distributed the papers herself, a phantom gliding through the awakening town. The newsstands were her battlefields, the streets her witness. She watched as people picked up the papers, their faces shifting from curiosity to shock to outrage as they absorbed the words she had so painstakingly crafted. Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to angry shouts. The town was a tinderbox, and her article was the spark. Jake found her near the saloon, the morning sun glinting off the gold letters of the sign. He watched her from across the street, his face etched with concern, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. He knew what she had done, the risk she had taken. The air crackled with a palpable tension, a sense of impending chaos. "Eliza," he said, his voice low and urgent as he approached. "You went too far." She met his gaze, her chin lifted defiantly. "Did I? Or did I finally tell the truth?" "The truth has consequences, Eliza. Harrison won't take this lying down." "Then let him come," she retorted, her voice trembling slightly despite her bravado. "I'm not afraid of him." Jake ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "That's what I'm afraid of. You should be." A crowd was gathering nearby, drawn by the rising voices. They were reading the article, their faces a mixture of anger and disbelief. One man, a burly miner with calloused hands, stepped forward, his eyes blazing with righteous fury. "He's been robbing us blind," he roared, his voice echoing through the street. "Lining his pockets while we break our backs in the mines." Others joined in, their voices rising in a chorus of discontent. The mood was volatile, threatening to erupt into violence. Jake instinctively moved closer to Eliza, placing himself between her and the growing crowd. "Easy, folks," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Let's not do anything we'll regret." But the people weren't listening. They were caught up in a wave of righteous indignation, their anger fueled by years of exploitation and injustice. They surged forward, their faces contorted with rage, their voices a deafening roar. "Harrison has to go," someone shouted. "We won't stand for this anymore." The crowd surged towards the mayor's office, a mob hungry for justice. Jake struggled to maintain order, his authority crumbling under the weight of their collective anger. He looked at Eliza, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and admiration. She had unleashed something powerful, something he wasn't sure he could control. Inside the mayor's office, Harrison watched the unfolding chaos from his window, his face a mask of barely concealed fury. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his hands trembled as he gripped the edge of his desk. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, and he knew exactly who to blame. "That meddling journalist," he snarled, his voice laced with venom. "She'll pay for this. They all will." He reached for the phone, his fingers fumbling with the receiver. He had allies, powerful men who wouldn't let him fall. He would call in his debts, unleash his own brand of justice. Eliza Thornton had declared war, and he intended to win, no matter the cost. His eyes narrowed, and a cruel smile twisted his lips. He still had a few cards left to play, and he knew exactly how to play them. Ambush the sinking sun stretched elongated, spectral figures across the parched street as Eliza quickened her pace toward her boarding house. The heady triumph of seeing her words emblazoned in print, of watching the town's smoldering resentment erupt, had soured into a creeping premonition. Harrison wouldn't suffer this affront quietly. She could practically taste his fury, a palpable menace thickening with the encroaching gloom. Underfoot, the boardwalk groaned a lonely counterpoint to the unnatural hush blanketing Deadwood Crossing. Where was the usual cacophony of drunken boasts and tinny piano tunes pouring from the saloon? The silence throbbed, predatory. She tightened her grip on her satchel's time-worn strap, her fingers reassuringly finding the solid heft of her diminutive derringer. Small comfort, perhaps, but comfort nonetheless. A figure peeled away from the inky blackness of an alley ahead. Silas. Immobile, he barricaded her path, his features swallowed by the shadow of his hat. "Evenin', Miss Thornton," he rumbled, his voice a low thrum that resonated in the airless quiet. "The mayor sends his compliments." Eliza's breath snagged, her fingers clenched around the pistol. "Relay my gratitude." She aimed for bravado, but a tremor betrayed her fear. Silas emitted a dry, rattling chuckle that scraped along her nerves. "He's displeased with your recent literary efforts." He edged closer, prompting Eliza to flinch back. "He feels you've misunderstood his generosity of spirit." "Generosity?" Eliza spat, defiance momentarily eclipsing her dread. "He's been sucking this town dry. He's colluding with the railroad, exploiting honest folk for his own enrichment." Silas lifted a shoulder in a gesture of indolent menace. "Merely words, Miss Thornton, and words, regrettably, can be hushed." A bowie knife slithered from his belt, its honed edge catching the last rays of fading light. Eliza's pulse hammered against her ribs. She scrabbled for the derringer, her movements clumsy with terror. She leveled the small weapon, her hand quivering. "Stand clear. I have no desire to employ this." Silas's grin flashed, a stark white gash in the gloom. "You lack the fortitude." He surged forward. Eliza squeezed the trigger. The derringer leaped in her grasp, the shot ripping through the stillness. Silas faltered, clutching at his shoulder, yet pressed onward, too near. Eliza abandoned the derringer, attempting to dart past, but he snared her arm in a crushing grip. "You little hornet," he growled, hauling her close. The reek of stale sweat and whiskey assaulted her senses. He raised the knife. A bellow tore through the oppressive stillness. Jake. He crashed into Silas with the force of a runaway locomotive, sending them both tumbling into the dirt. The knife skittered away. Eliza scrambled backward, gasping for air. Jake and Silas wrestled, a raw, desperate contest for survival. Silas possessed greater size, superior strength. But Jake fought with a savage intensity Eliza hadn't imagined him capable of. He connected a blow with Silas's jaw, but Silas retaliated with a brutal kick to Jake's ribs. Jake groaned, but didn't yield. Silas managed to find his feet. Snatching up the discarded knife, he stalked toward Jake, who struggled to rise. "Jake, look out!" Eliza shrieked, her voice ragged with panic. Silas raised the blade, poised to strike. Jake saw the impending blow, but lacked the time. The blade arced downward. Eliza clamped her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable, but it never came. Instead, a sickening, sodden thud echoed, followed by a grunt of agony. She blinked open her eyes to see Jake standing, swaying unsteadily, Silas a heap at his feet. The knife rested a few feet away. Jake turned, his face ashen and smudged with grime. A dark blossom stained his shirt just below his ribs. He wobbled, then stumbled in her direction. "Jake!" Eliza rushed forward, catching him as he collapsed against her. "You're wounded. You're wounded." "I'm all right," he rasped, his voice strained. He pressed a hand to his side, his fingers withdrawing crimson. "All right." "You've been stabbed," Eliza cried, her panic rising. "We need Doc Miller." "No time," Jake murmured, his eyes losing focus. "He'll come searching for both of us." He met her gaze, his expression urgent. "You must leave Deadwood." "Leave? Are you insane?" "I won't abandon you," Eliza protested, her voice trembling. "And I will not run. I refuse to let Harrison triumph." Jake coughed, a crimson fleck appearing on his lips. "He will triumph, unless you vanish. He wants you. He cares little about the town." Eliza stared, her heart fracturing. He was prepared to forfeit everything to safeguard her. But she couldn't leave him. She wouldn't. "I'm staying by your side, Jake," she repeated, her voice resolute. "We're facing this together. We will confront him together." She helped him lean against a building, tore a strip from her petticoat, and pressed it against the wound. "We must find shelter, where he will not think to look." Jake closed his eyes, his face gaunt with suffering. "The old Miller mine, beyond town. Abandoned place." Eliza nodded, her mind racing. The Miller mine. A desperate gamble, yet their sole recourse. She had to get him there, and swiftly. She scanned the desolate street. The shadows seemed to coil tighter, the silence bearing down on them like a suffocating shroud. "Hold on, Jake," she urged, her voice firm. "We are escaping this place." She assisted him to his feet, bearing his weight as they staggered into the encompassing gloom. Each step was torment for Jake, and Eliza could feel his vitality seeping away. But she would not surrender. She must get him to safety. She had to repay the man who had risked his life to save hers. And perhaps, just perhaps, she could also rescue Deadwood Crossing. Yet, as they vanished into the darkness, the crushing weight of their seemingly impossible task settled upon them, a burden of fear and uncertainty. The real battle was only beginning. Rallying the town, the Miller mine reeked of stagnant water and time, a sepulchre carved into the earth. Eliza tore at her petticoat, crimson staining the fabric alongside her trembling fingers as she tended to Jake. He was sprawled amongst discarded burlap, his complexion ashen, his breath a shallow rattle. Each strained inhalation was a silent indictment, a painful sting. "Easy now," she breathed, pressing the makeshift compress against the gash in his side. A spark of defiance ignited in his gaze. "Should have left me to kick. Saves you the bother." Eliza's grip tightened on his good shoulder, a fierce hold belying the tremor in her limbs. "Don't even think that way. Not on my watch, Jake Matthews. Never." The words hitched, revealing the dread that constricted her throat. Confronting venal politicians, menacing thugs, all child's play compared to the sight of Jake, so breakable, bleeding out. A weak smile touched his lips, a mere shadow of the roguish charm that usually lit his features. "You're a hard case, Eliza. Always gotta get the last word." "Invariably," she conceded, her tone gentler now, infused with a tenderness she'd previously kept veiled. She worked swiftly, expertly, binding the wound as snugly as she dared, fully aware of its inadequacy. He required a physician, a resource barred by the stranglehold Harrison had on Deadwood. As dawn's first light seeped into the mine, illuminating the floating dust with an otherworldly radiance, Eliza remained vigilant beside Jake, silently imploring him to endure. The ramifications of her choice weighed heavily. She could have vanished, ensured her own safety, yet abandoning him was inconceivable. He had risked everything for her she would reciprocate. But this underground refuge was only a temporary reprieve. Harrison was relentless, a predator on the hunt. She had to retaliate, not only for Jake's sake, but for the soul of Deadwood. An idea sparked, a flame of resistance against the encroaching despair. She would galvanize the town, reveal Harrison's true nature. She possessed the testimony, the evidence. All that remained was the resolve to utter it, and the persuasive power to compel others to heed her. By mid-morning, Jake lay in restless slumber, fever still rampant. Eliza stole out of the mine, her pulse hammering in her chest. The air bit with a sharp chill, carrying the scent of pines and the distant groan of a locomotive. She traversed the town, her footfalls echoing eerily on the deserted thoroughfares. The exposé had sown its seeds. A palpable fear permeated the atmosphere, thick and suffocating. Faces peered from behind window coverings, etched with anxiety. Inhaling deeply, Eliza ascended an overturned wagon, the planks creaking beneath her weight. She cleared her throat, her voice wavering momentarily as she began to speak. "People of Deadwood, I know fear has you in its grip. I know Harrison has you living under a cloud of terror. But I'm here to tell you it doesn't have to be this way." A few faces materialized in doorways, hesitant, wary. A woman clutching a shawl, a boy with inquisitive eyes, a wizened man leaning on a walking stick. Eliza pressed on, her voice gaining strength, fueled by burning conviction. "He's a con man, a thief, and a killer. He's been padding his coffers with your sweat, turning a blind eye to the lawlessness that festers in our streets." She detailed the findings of her investigation, the payoffs, the fixed votes, the disappearances. She spoke of Silas, Harrison's muscle, and the dread he instilled in the community. Her words hung heavily in the air, freighted with truth. Drawn by her voice, her passion, her unwavering faith in righteousness, the crowd swelled. Miners, merchants, dance hall girls, all listening intently, their faces masks of apprehension and nascent hope. "He believes he can control us," Eliza shouted, her voice resonating across the town square. "He believes he can silence us with threats and brutality. But he's mistaken. We are the citizens of Deadwood, and we will be heard." A low murmur rippled through the assembled, a tentative affirmation. "I realize it's risky," Eliza continued, her voice softening slightly. "But we can't allow fear to paralyze us. We must stand together, united, and demand justice. We must demonstrate to Harrison that he doesn't own this town, we do." She paused, her gaze scanning the faces before her, seeking a spark of recognition, a glint of courage. Then a voice emerged from the crowd, a rough, hesitant voice. "What do you want us to do?" Eliza's heart surged. "I want you to march with me. I want you to congregate outside Harrison's headquarters and demand his ouster. I want you to demonstrate to the world that Deadwood will not tolerate corruption." The crowd exploded in a cacophony of shouts and cheers. A blacksmith stepped forward, his expression grim, his hammer aloft. "I'm with you," he roared. A saloon entertainer, her eyes blazing with defiance, seconded him. "Me too." Then another, and another, until the entire assembly was chanting, "Harrison must go! Harrison must go!" Eliza leaped from the wagon, a wave of hope washing over her. The people of Deadwood were awakening. They were enraged, and they were prepared to fight. As the throng began its march towards Harrison's office, Eliza felt a jolt of adrenaline surge through her. This was merely the opening salvo. Harrison wouldn't relinquish power without resistance. But she felt no fear. She possessed the truth as her weapon, and the people of Deadwood as her shield. And somewhere, in the shadowy depths of the Miller mine, Jake waged his own battle for survival, his resilience fueling hers. They reached Harrison's base of operations, a modest but imposing structure situated at the end of Main Street. The windows were unlit, the entrance secured. Silas and 2 henchmen stood sentinel, their expressions blank, their hands hovering near their firearms. The throng halted, a wall of resistance confronting the silent building. Eliza stepped forward, her voice ringing clear and strong. "Harrison, emerge and answer for your crimes. We know what you've done. We demand your resignation." Silence descended. Then the door groaned open, and Harrison appeared, his face flushed crimson, his eyes narrowed to slits. He surveyed the crowd with a contemptuous sneer. "What is the meaning of this disruption?" he barked, his voice dripping with disdain. "Disperse before I have you all arrested for unlawful assembly." "We're not moving," Eliza retorted, her voice unwavering. "We know about the kickbacks, the killings, the rot. We know everything, Harrison. And we won't rest until justice is served." Harrison's face darkened further. "You're treading on dangerous ground, Eliza. This is a game you cannot win." "The sole mistake I made was waiting so long to expose you," she snapped back. He chuckled, a chilling, menacing sound. "You genuinely believe you stand a chance? You believe these sheep will support you when the stakes are high? They're weak, Eliza, easily led astray. They possess a strength you underestimate," Eliza countered. "They've endured living in fear for far too long. They're ready to fight for their town, for their future." Harrison's eyes flickered towards the mass of people, a flicker of doubt crossing his features. He understood Eliza was correct. He had misjudged the tenacity of Deadwood's citizens. "Very well," he conceded, his tone suddenly composed. "If it's a confrontation you seek, then so be it." He gestured to Silas and the others. "Take them down." Silas grinned, a predatory flash of teeth in the sudden hush. He drew his pistol, the metallic snick echoing in the stillness. The crowd gasped, a collective shudder running through them. Eliza remained steadfast, her heart pounding like a drum, her hand instinctively seeking the small derringer concealed in her pocket. This was it, the critical moment. The conflict for Deadwood had commenced. framed Eliza's words still hung in the air like gunpowder when the hammer fell. Jake recognized the tremor, a primal warning unrelated to the whiskey he'd sworn off weeks earlier. He steadied a sheet of plywood against Mrs. Olson's fractured window, shards of glass glinting like wicked teeth in the dirt when they appeared. Not Harrison's usual collection of goons, but men radiating a dangerous, honed competence. Their purposeful stride sent a shard of ice down his spine. Jake Matthews, the leader, rasped, his voice like a file on bone. Under arrest, aggravated assault. Jake straightened, the hammer now an unbearable weight in his hand. Assault? On whom? Ezra Klein, came the reply, a glint of something inscrutable in the man's gaze. Claims you damn near killed him last night. A sour taste rose in Jake's throat. Ezra Klein, Harrison's lackey, and the town's resident drunk. A clumsy frame, transparent as glass, yet with Harrison manipulating events, transparency mattered little. This is a crock, Jake retorted, striving for composure. He risked a glance at the forming crowd, their expressions a blend of unease and accusation. Eliza was absent. He offered a silent prayer for her safety. Klein's lying. I haven't laid eyes on him for days. That's for the court to decide, the man stated, advancing. Two others flanked Jake, hands hovering near their sidearms. Resisting would only worsen his situation, validate Harrison's manufactured narrative. However, the prospect of imprisonment, helpless while Harrison tightened his stranglehold on the town, on Eliza, ignited a furious fire within him. Drop the hammer, deputy, the man commanded, shedding the affected drawl, his tone hardening. Don't complicate things. Jake slowly complied, the hammer's dull thud against the wood echoing in the sudden quiet. He allowed them to relieve him of his weapon, the coldness of the steel a stark counterpoint to his inner conflagration. As they escorted him toward the makeshift jail, he observed the townsfolk's faces. These weren't the visages he recognized. They were etched with distrust, muttering amongst themselves. Harrison's venom had seeped into their minds, distorting their perceptions. The cell was cramped, dank, and redolent of stale beer and lost hope. He slumped onto the cot, the protesting springs digging into his back, and wrestled with the problem. Escape was paramount. He had to locate Eliza, expose Harrison before it was too late. But how could he achieve that? Harrison had effectively isolated him, severing all ties. He was utterly alone. Hours oozed by with agonizing slowness. The oppressive quiet was pierced only by sporadic taunts from the outside, whispers escalating into jeers. He discerned Mrs. Olson's voice, reedy but unwavering, defending him, instantly lost in the swelling chorus of recriminations. Then, Eliza's voice pierced the tumult, clear and resolute, a clarion call. "This is a fabrication," she proclaimed. "Jake Matthews is incapable of such an act. Harrison is framing him." He pressed his face against the bars, desperate for a glimpse of her. But the throng surged forward, obstructing his view. He could hear the animosity in their shouts, the seeds of doubt firmly planted. "He's one of them," someone bellowed. "Always shielding Harrison." "She's complicit too," another voice shrieked. "Protecting her partner in crime." Eliza's voice remained steady. "He's been helping me. He's been jeopardizing his own safety to expose Harrison's corruption." "Lies," the mob roared. "All lies." The sound of a stinging slap cut through the air, silencing Eliza. Jake's stomach twisted. He rattled the bars, consumed by fury. He would dismantle this entire town to reach her. The din subsided, replaced by a heavy, foreboding quiet. He sank back onto the cot, burying his face in his hands. He had to reach her. He had to safeguard her. But how could he confront a foe who commanded not merely the law, but the very thoughts of the people he had pledged to serve? Later, the jail door groaned open. Harrison stood in the entrance, a self-satisfied smirk twisting his features. "Well, well, deputy," he drawled, his tone slick with false concern. "Seems your little crusade has finally caught up with you. The citizenry has spoken. They no longer welcome your kind." Jake rose to his feet, his eyes blazing with animosity. "You orchestrated this." Harrison chuckled softly. "Did I? Or did I simply unveil the reality? You were always too idealistic for this town, Jake, too blinded by your self-righteousness. You won't triumph," Jake vowed, his voice a low rumble. "Eliza will unmask you. The truth will emerge." Harrison's grin broadened. "Eliza? She's a guest of the town now. For her own well-being, naturally. Wouldn't want her harmed by all these disgruntled citizens." Jake lunged at the bars, his hands grasping for Harrison's throat. But Harrison remained impassive. 2 guards advanced, restraining Jake, their grip unyielding. "If you lay a hand on her," Jake snarled, his voice thick with rage, "I will ensure your demise." Harrison adjusted his collar, unperturbed. "Such intemperate language, deputy. A pity. You possessed considerable potential. However, you espoused the losing cause. You chose her." He pivoted and departed, leaving Jake alone in the oppressive darkness, the weight of his impotence crushing him. He had failed. He had failed the community. He had failed Eliza. And now he was imprisoned, incapable of halting Harrison's systematic destruction of everything he cherished. The sole sound was the ghost of Harrison's declaration, "You chose her." Jake closed his eyes. The image of Eliza's face burning into his memory. He had chosen her, and he would make that same choice again, even if it spelled his doom. Unraveling the truth, the frigid air clawed at Eliza, a bitter prelude to the dread constricting her chest. Jake, behind bars, falsely accused, and she, a marked woman for her loyalty. Justice in Deadwood Crossing seemed a cruel jest, a forgotten ideal she refused to relinquish. Her investigation's initial forays led her back years, to a land deal steeped in suspicion and conveniently vanished records. Mayor Harrison, even then a man accustomed to grad, power, adept at suppressing unwelcome realities. The land, now coveted property adjacent to the new rail line, had belonged to the Bellwether family, driven off their homestead by veiled threats and stark intimidation. A fleeting mention in old probate files had etched the name in Eliza's memory. She located the surviving son, Thomas Bellwether, eking out a hardscrabble existence on the town's periphery. His gaze, hollowed by despair, reflected a sorrow that time had only deepened. "Harrison," he croaked, his voice gravelly with resentment. "He coveted our land, claimed the railroad required it. We resisted. Then misfortunes began. Our barn, reduced to embers. Our livestock vanished. My mother succumbed to grief." He averted his gaze, shame clouding his eyes. "We were ruined." Eliza gently probed, her journalistic instincts honed through years of pursuing obscured truths. Did he possess any tangible proof? Any documents? Anything that would directly implicate Harrison? Bellwether simply shook his head, a picture of defeat. "Nothing solid. just rumors. Everyone suspected, but no one dared to challenge him. Departing Bellwether's meager dwelling, a leaden weight settled in Eliza's gut. Rumors weren't enough. She needed irrefutable evidence. Evidence to dismantle Harrison's carefully crafted public image. Her next target, Silas Croft, one of Harrison's cronies, a man whose allegiance could be swayed with the right inducement or shattered with the right pressure. Croft held sway over the saloon, a haven of vice and hushed bargains. Eliza entered, her spine rigid, impervious to the predatory stares and the dense fog of tobacco smoke. She found Croft holding court at a secluded table, surrounded by his sycophants. "Mr. Croft," she stated, her voice sharp enough to cut through the din. "I need to inquire about Mayor Harrison." Croft's eyes narrowed to slits. "The mayor? You're barking up the wrong tree, lady." Eliza leaned in, her voice a silken threat. "Spare me the pretense, Croft. I know about the Bellwether land. I know about the methods Harrison employed to acquire it." A beat of silence hung in the air. "And I also know about your accumulating debts. Debts that certain parties might find interesting." Color drained from Croft's face. He dismissed his entourage with a flick of his wrist. "What's your game?" Eliza spelled it out, her demands concise and unequivocal. She wanted details regarding Harrison's shady dealings, the identities of his co-conspirators, anything connecting him to Jake Matthews's setup. Croft stalled, his gaze flitting nervously around the room. He was caught in a vise. Loyalty to Harrison versus his own survival. "I can't," he breathed, his voice choked with terror. "He'll bury me." "He will anyway," Eliza retorted, "when I expose him. Now is your chance to choose which side you're on." She fixed him with an unwavering stare, then turned to leave. As she neared the exit, Croft relented. "Wait," he rasped, his voice ragged. I know something about the railroad contract. Harrison manipulated the bidding, accepted a bribe from the railroad magnate, a man named Sterling, a substantial one. Sterling. The name echoed in Eliza's mind. Whispers of his immense wealth and merciless ambition were ubiquitous. A puppeteer, manipulating events from the shadows, and Harrison, it appeared, was one of his marionettes. Where is his marionettes? The proof? Eliza pressed, her heart thrumming. Croft hesitated, then produced a crumpled scrap of paper from his inner pocket. "A page ripped from a ledger," he confessed, his voice trembling. "It documents the payoff, Harrison's share. I pilfered it some time ago, kept it as a safeguard." Eliza snatched the paper, her fingers shaking. The ledger page was a chaotic web of figures and coded notations, but one entry screamed out, "HRR, Contract S. St. T," followed by a sum that would shame a king. The smoking gun, at last. But as she scrutinized the ledger, another notation snagged her attention. A date, scribbled in the margin adjacent to a smaller disbursement. The date was a decade in the past. The notation, BH silenced. BH. Bellwether Homestead. Nausea surged through Eliza. This was not just a crooked railroad deal. This was about murder. Harrison had silenced someone linked to the Bellwether land grab. The misfortunes weren't accidents at all. Eliza's thoughts raced. She needed to transmit this information to anyone who could act upon it. But who could she trust? The sheriff was Harrison's puppet. The town council, complicit. She was alone, armed with a perilous truth that could cost her everything. Departing the saloon, she felt a palpable presence. an unseen observer tracking her movements. She was being watched. Harrison was aware of her progress. She had to flee Deadwood Crossing, locate a sanctuary to regroup, to devise her next strategy, and, most critically, she had to devise a way to liberate Jake. Their lives hinged on it. Escape and reunion. The jail cell was a frigid tomb, silence pressing down like a shroud. Jake's gaze was fixed on the barred window, moonlight etching stark lines across the grimy floor. He hadn't foreseen languishing here, not after his sacrifices. The system, that deliberate engine of justice, had always been his creed. Now, however, it felt like that very mechanism was grinding him to dust. Eliza's image flickered in his mind, her resolute gaze, the thoughtful tilt of her head. He had to reach her, ensure her safety. A stealthy rasp against the cell door shattered the stillness. Every muscle coiled. "Who is it?" A hushed, familiar voice replied. "Silas." Quiet. Silas Croft, the village smith, a lifelong acquaintance, a man usually lost in the clamor of his forge. "Silas, what are you doing?" Jake breathed, peering through the gloom. Silas wrestled with the lockpicks catching the faint light. "Hauling you out, that's what. Heard about Harrison's play. Pure wrong, Jake. Always has been." Jake watched, hope blooming in the barren landscape of his despair. "You're risking everything, Silas." "Someone had to," Silas muttered, finally coaxing the lock open. The door groaned in protest. "Besides, I'm square with you. Remember that tangle down by the river? You could have buried me, but you didn't." Jake emerged, limbs protesting their confinement. "This is different." "Maybe so, but loyalty cuts deep, Jake. Now move, time's a robber." They navigated the inky jailhouse, Silas surprisingly nimble. A saddled horse waited in the back shadows. "North," Silas directed, handing over the reins. "Eliza lit out that way. Saw her leave earlier." "You saw her?" Relief surged, threatening to drown him. "Is she safe?" Looked determined, bristling, like a thunderhead gathering, but she was upright and moving. Silas paused, his lined face carved with worry. "Jake, tread carefully. Harrison owns half the town." "I know," Jake replied, swinging onto the horse. "Thanks, Silas. This will never be forgotten." Silas gave a curt nod, his eyes reflecting a quiet strength. "Just set things right, Jake. That's all that matters." He kicked the horse into motion, wind biting at his exposed skin. The frigid air seared his lungs, but his thoughts were solely for Eliza. He had to find her, shield her from harm. Eliza waited at the old hunting cabin, a familiar refuge when disappearing was required. The fire snapped, painting the log walls with lively shadows. She'd spent hours studying the ledger page, the irrefutable evidence of Harrison's avarice. Yet, her mind kept returning to Jake, to the weary resignation etched on his face in that cell. She had failed him, drawn him into this viper's nest, and now he was paying the toll. The thud of approaching hooves jolted her. Her hand instinctively sought the pistol tucked at her hip. But then she saw him, a dark figure against the silvered trees. "Jake." Abandoning all caution, she flew into his arms, burying her face against his chest. "Jake," she whispered, voice thick with unshed tears. "You're free." He embraced her fiercely, his presence a comforting anchor. "Silas helped me. He saw Harrison's true colors. Are you hurt?" She stepped back, searching his face. "I'm unharmed, but they accused you of assaulting Hank Thompson." I know you're innocent. Jake sighed, raking a hand through his disheveled hair. None of that matters now. We have to focus on Harrison. I know about the Bellwether land, Eliza. Everything. Eliza nodded, guiding him into the cabin's warmth. She presented the ledger page, detailing its incriminating contents. This is it, Jake. The proof to expose him. He scrutinized the document, his features hardening. Harrison will deny it, claim it's a fabrication. Then we have to make sure he can't, Eliza declared, her voice edged with steel. Founders' Day is tomorrow. The entire town will be gathered. That's when we strike. Jake searched her eyes, a mixture of admiration and trepidation. It's far too dangerous, Eliza. He'll anticipate something. He'll have eyes everywhere. I know, she replied, lifting her chin defiantly. But we have no alternative. We can't allow him to escape justice. The remainder of the night was spent hunched over town maps, strategizing. Precision, calculation were paramount. A single misstep could unravel everything. As dawn painted the sky in hues of rose and gold, Jake turned to Eliza, his expression earnest. Eliza, I need to say something. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What is it, Jake? He clasped her hand, his touch sending a tremor through her. I misjudged you. I was wrong about everything. I believed you were merely a rabble-rouser, that you didn't grasp the way things operate here. But I was mistaken. You possess more courage than anyone I know. Eliza's eyes glistened. Jacob. And I care for you, Eliza, more profoundly than I ever imagined possible. He hesitated, his gaze unwavering. I realize this is inopportune, with everything in motion, but I needed you to know. She reached up, her fingers tracing the lines around his eyes. I care for you as well, Jake, beyond words. For a timeless moment, they stood entwined. The weight of their past and the uncertainty of their future suspended in the air between them. Then Eliza broke the spell, a spark of resolve returning to her eyes. We can deal with all of this later, Jake. Presently, we have a corrupt mayor to unmask. Jake nodded, a ghost of a smile gracing his lips. Right. Let's get to it. The Founders' Day festivities were in full bloom upon their arrival. Banners snapped gaily in the breeze. Children darted through the throngs, and the aroma of roasting meat mingled with the lively strains of music. Yet, beneath the cheerful surface, Eliza sensed a palpable tension, a subtle current of fear and distrust. They navigated the crowd, acutely aware of their surroundings. Harrison stood on the dais, delivering a saccharine speech about the town's glorious heritage and its even brighter destiny. He embodied the picture of a benevolent leader, his face radiating confidence and goodwill. A wave of fury washed over Eliza, a fierce desire to tear away the charade and reveal the malignancy beneath. Jake squeezed her hand, a silent reassurance. Ready? He murmured. Eliza inhaled deeply, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Ready? Their plan was stark in its simplicity, but fraught with peril. Eliza would approach Harrison under the guise of greeting him, presenting the ledger page as he concluded his address. Jake would act as a safeguard, preventing any interference. They were wagering everything on this instant, banking on the power of truth to sway the populace. As Harrison reached the climax of his speech, a thunderous applause erupted. He beamed, reveling in the town's veneration. Eliza stepped forward, her hand diving into her satchel. This was the moment. Founders' Day showdown, a palpable tension filled the air. Faded patriotic decorations looped across Main Street, suspended between buildings weathered by sun and years. The rich aroma of roasting meat mingled with the delicate sweetness of apple pie, hinting at a celebratory meal under the expansive Montana sky. Founder's Day. The irony hung heavy, a bitter counterpoint to the festivities. Eliza stood on the rickety platform, normally the domain of traveling charlatans and small-time orchestras. Her pulse hammered in her chest, a frantic tattoo against the sudden hush that had fallen over the townsfolk. Jake remained at the edge of the assembly, his steadfast presence a comforting beacon in the sea of faces. He was casually dressed, not in his official attire, yet his gaze held the same unwavering determination she had come to trust. Her fingers tightened on the script, the words slightly blurred by her intense focus. "Friends, neighbors," she began, her voice resonating through the square. "We gather to commemorate the founding of Deadwood Crossing, a community ostensibly built on aspirations of opportunity and prosperity." A ripple of expectation moved through the crowd, a low, anticipatory murmur. But what becomes of those dreams when they are rooted in deception? Eliza paused, allowing her words to linger. She noted the subtle shift in expressions, the overt animosity on some faces. Harrison stood near the front, his features a carefully constructed mask of fury. Silas lurked behind him, his hand never far from his sidearm. "I arrived in Deadwood Crossing, seeking a narrative," Eliza continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I unearthed one, a tale of corruption, avarice, and treachery that permeates this entire town." Methodically, she presented the evidence. The unlawful seizure of land, the deceptive agreements, the hushed accounts of violence stifled by intimidation. She spoke of the railroad, its promises of advancement merely veiling its merciless pursuit of gain. She cited names, dates, and figures, the unvarnished truth resonating in the open air. Complete silence descended as she concluded. Then, a single voice shattered the stillness. "Lies! Fabrications!" Harrison roared, pushing his way forward. "This woman is a rabble-rouser, a deceiver sent here to dismantle everything we have constructed." The crowd erupted, a chaotic mixture of shouts and counter-accusations. Some sided with Harrison, their livelihoods intertwined with his continued dominion. Others looked on in stunned disbelief, their faces reflecting uncertainty and doubt. Eliza held her ground, her gaze locked on Harrison. "The truth is out in the light," she cried above the clamor. "Don't let him silence it." Harrison, his face distorted with rage, lunged forward, shoving people aside. "Arrest her!" he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "She's spreading dissent." Silas moved forward, his eyes devoid of warmth or mercy. But before he could react, Jake intervened. He moved swiftly through the throng, his motions efficient and assured. Reaching the platform in mere seconds, he positioned himself between Eliza and Harrison. "Back down, Meyer," Jake said, his voice a low, menacing rumble. "This has gone too far." "You turncoat," Harrison spat, his face flushed crimson. "You swore to uphold the law." "I swore to uphold justice," Jake retorted, his gaze hardening. "And you, sir, are obstructing it." The crowd swayed forward, a mass of humanity caught between dread and outrage. Silas raised his revolver, aiming in Eliza's direction. "This ends now," he growled. But then, an unforeseen event unfolded. A voice, thick with remorse and vibrating with apprehension, pierced the tumult. "Don't do it, Silas." It was Martha, Silas's wife, forcing her way through the crowd. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes pleading. "Don't let him destroy you too." Silas faltered, his grip on the revolver loosening slightly. He looked from Martha to Harrison, his face a complex tableau of conflicting emotions. "He promised me," Silas whispered, his voice barely audible. "He promised us a better life." "He deceived you," Martha cried, her voice breaking. "He always lies." Silas's face crumbled. He lowered the revolver, his shoulders sagging in defeat. "It's the truth," he admitted, his voice barely a breath. "He told me to deal with anyone causing difficulties. Said it was for the good of the town." A collective gasp swept through the gathering. All eyes shifted to Harrison, his face now ashen. He resembled a trapped animal, his eyes darting frantically from one person to the next. "He's lying," Harrison stammered weakly. "He's trying to incriminate me." But it was too late. The atmosphere had shifted. The uncertainty and confusion had solidified into resentment and betrayal. Accusations rang out, demands for answers clamoring in the air. Jake stepped forward, his voice carrying an unmistakable authority. "Mayor Harrison," he declared, "you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice." Chaos erupted as the crowd surged toward Harrison. Jake acted decisively, placing himself between the mayor and the enraged citizens. He managed to restrain Harrison, securing his hands behind his back. As Jake led Harrison away, Silas came forward. "I'll tell everything," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Everything he did. Eliza watched as Harrison was escorted away, his era of dominance brought to an end. She looked at Jake, his face lined with weariness, yet his eyes shone with a hard-won triumph. Cheers erupted from the crowd, their voices full of hope and release. Eliza knew that the struggle was far from finished. The railroad's ominous shadow still stretched far beyond Deadwood Crossing, and she had no doubt that Harrison's cohorts would not surrender without a fight. Later that evening, as the remnants of the Founders' Day celebration lay scattered around them, Eliza and Jake stood at the edge of town, gazing at the star-dusted expanse above. "It's finished," Eliza said, her voice barely audible. "At least, the worst of it." Jake took her hand, his fingers entwining with hers. "It's only the beginning," he said softly, "but we'll face it together." A long silence settled between them, broken only by the sounds of the night. Eliza turned to Jake, her eyes filled with a blend of love and sorrow. "I can't remain here," she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "I've become a target. Harrison's allies will pursue me." Jake nodded, his face somber. "I understand," he said. "It's not safe for you here." "What about you?" Eliza asked, her voice laced with concern. "What will you do?" Jake looked at her, his eyes filled with a profound and unwavering devotion. "I'm leaving with you," he said, his voice resolute. "I can't stay here any longer. This town, it's not what I imagined, and I can't continue pretending." Eliza's eyes widened in astonishment. "But your duty," she protested. "Your badge, Jake shook his head. "My allegiance is to you," he said, his voice firm. "And my badge, it's just a piece of metal. It doesn't define me." He detached the badge from his vest, the silver catching the faint light of the moon. He extended it toward Eliza, his hand trembling slightly. "Here," he said, "keep it, as a reminder of what we fought for." Eliza accepted the badge, her fingers closing around it. She looked at Jake, her heart brimming with love and gratitude. "Where will we go?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake smiled, a genuine and hopeful smile that illuminated his eyes. "Anywhere," he said. "Anywhere we can be together. Anywhere we can create a new life, free from the darkness of the past. They turned and walked away from Deadwood Crossing, hand in hand, their footsteps echoing in the quiet of the night. They left behind a town struggling for rebirth, a town confronting its internal struggles. But they carried with them something far more valuable, the love they had discovered amid the turmoil, a love that had empowered them to fight for justice and the courage to chart their own course. Their love was a delicate spark against the immense void, yet it was a spark that burned bright with promise, an assurance of a new beginning on a new horizon.